Hey, welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a really, really good break and you were able to meet a lot of people in this RegTech arena in this event of today, the Summit of 2021. And now we're back. We're in a new track, and the track is called Industry Spotlights. And I was already backstage with a couple of people for the next panel. And earlier we said it takes three to tango. So today it's going to be risk, compliance, and AI. And that's going to be led by Tal. And Tal has been running a marathon today. And I know I'm lying a little bit, but he will explain you later on. Tal, the floor is yours.
Hi, thank you. Thank you very much, Coy. It's great to be here at RegTech. I'm actually right now in Tel Aviv, in Israel. And I did run this morning, but it wasn't a marathon. It will be, the marathon is tomorrow. But we have an exciting session for you today. Let me give you a short 1-minute intro about myself, and then we'll go through the panelists, which we really created a great panel for you. So my name is Tal. I'm managing partner at Equitech, which is a leading fintech firm from Israel. I'm also president of FinTech-Aviv, the Israeli Fintech Association. So basically, anything and everything you want from the Israeli market, just ping me. We have our booth here. We have me here. So just send a question or ask. And I'd like to go through our panelists, which will have their video on. Okay, so we'll start with ladies, of course. So Miss Diana Paredes, please. Hi, how are you? Please share where you're from, a name of maybe a animal you like in the first letter, and
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you very much for having me. So I'm the CEO and co-founder of Suade Labs. We basically have been doing RegTech for the past few years. Our headquarters are in London, but we've expanded internationally with offices in Singapore, across Europe, and opening in New York as well. So basically, what we have been doing is really taking advantage of modern technology to help normalize large amounts of data for the financial industry, and then turn it into a report or analytics or calculations. And we leverage of things like NLP and machine learning as part of our work as well. And it's very much about pure automation that allows our clients to take data and basically submit it to the regulators. We have been doing a lot of work with regulators around the world, with the World Economic Forum. We've had the pleasure, I guess, to really work very heavily with the industry when it comes to thinking around data standards and all of that kind of stuff, which I'm sure we'll cover as part of the panel as well. My favorite animal, I have two, and they're my children. And I would like count them as, you know, literally Tasmanian devils, both of them, but they're a joy to be with. So that would be it for me.
Wow, so they're children devil animals.
Yeah.
That's a great combination.
And angels too.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much, Diana. John, hi, how are you?
I'm doing well, Tal. Good morning.
Way too early for you to be up, my friend.
Yes, I'm here in the southeast of the United States. It's 4 a.m. and it's happy to be with all of you. And sorry I haven't kept up with Tal and his running. I just woke up, but I'll try later to catch up.
You seem so fresh for this time of hour, so it's a nice job.
Well, I have a lot of Turkish coffee here. I'm the founder of a company called SightSpan, where we deal with regulatory risk on a global basis. And we partner with a lot of different technical firms and government organizations designing out very practical and pragmatic technologies in order to find illicit activity in the banking system, whether it be corrupt politicians or people or counter-terrorist activities or money laundering. Those are the areas that we specialize in. The firm also does security throughout the world, specifically in the Middle East. And I get very involved and have a passion for counterterrorism. I speak often on the subject to parliamentary organizations working to better position the financial community and the elected officials to try to come up with some sort of rational solutions. I'll be speaking in Hungary in the next couple of months, and Israel and Panama. That's something in addition to SightSpan. I just feel very strongly that a lot of the technologies that we're going to be discussing today are not just about making money, or it's about solving larger social problems. Prior to forming SightSpan 14 years ago, I was the executive delivery manager for AML and risk management at Bank of America on a global basis. I enjoyed that because it allowed me to really deal with things on 140 countries. So it was really cool to learn all the aspects of each country, and we'll get into that a little bit later. I don't have a favorite animal. I love so many, but I can tell you, and living in North Carolina, I don't like snakes. We have the most variety of poisonous snakes in the whole United States. So it's easier for me to say what I don't like because I just love all the animals.
Okay, I thought you'll go with a bald eagle, like for the context, but not favorite of snakes. I'll get back to that on.
Well, like I have a bald eagle right there, as a matter of fact.
Oh, that's why I thought you were going to say that. Okay, great. Thank you, John, and really appreciate you coming from so far to join us. Izhar, I saved you for the last because you're last, and you're from Tel Aviv as well, and we're actually room to room right here. Give me a hand. It doesn't work. Yeah. So give us a little bit of background about yourself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Izhar Arieli. I'm living in Tel Aviv and starting TenureX in Tel Aviv as an Israeli company. I'm the CEO and founder of TenureX. What we're doing is that we're creating a corresponding banking service as a service platform. With that, we're building a platform that facilitates the creation of relationships between financial institutions and enables them to send wire transfers without the risk that is implied from these operations. And if we look on our goal is in high level to democratize corresponding banking and allow our customers to connect and streamline relationships with their current and future banking partners over a reliable and controlled network. We're using data first, the same like credit card schemes are doing today, but we're shifting that to wire transfers, and therefore we're creating something very new for that world. So this is who I am and what we're doing. An animal, I think a lion, but after Diana described her kids, and I have to say that my kids is the same animals I think that Diana has. So angels and devils in the same thing, and my favorite animals. But if I will choose a real animal, except my kids, it will be a lion.
All right. Thank you, and you definitely have the beard for that, so that's cool.
I'm trying, and the last name.
Let's say our audience are sitting and like, when are we gonna end this family matters and go into real content? So we're gonna start. We have a lot of content. Like we brainstorm a little bit on what we're gonna discuss, and this is going to be an open discussion. I'm gonna interrupt you all the time. You're gonna interrupt one another all the time. That way, it will be interesting for our viewers. But basically, the theme for our session is banking and regulation. There's this paradigm that, let's say, on one hand, there's this constant demand from regulators that are really creating hurdles for the industry, especially for small, medium banks or the one that aren't very suitable or organized to accommodate the rapid change in regulatory framework. And there are some rules and requirements of regulators in different markets that are going digital, that are fostering innovation. So it's really hard to swim in that water, and without not every company has a chief regulation officer or someone who can help them navigate in these stormy waters. So I want to hear your input on how do the regulators think that we need to even address these entire changes and rapid rapid changes that they're doing for every entity that is out there without limiting the amount of actual business undergoing.
I'm happy to give it a go. Obviously, I guess in this panel, we probably don't want to speak for regulators, but I can at least tell you what I've seen and observed in the past few years. When we started there were really not a lot of fintech teams within the regulatory space. And over the past few years, what we have seen is that even the smallest central banks or the smallest regulator will at least have a couple of people that are their fintech team to look at the industry, which is obviously very positive. So from that perspective, I would say that they are really aware that technology is something they need to be observing live, and that it should not be something that they should ignore fundamentally. And I remember there was a session that I attended where we had one of the heads of the Central Bank of France, and my question was, and the ECB as well, and I remember asking them, well, are you guys actually using fintech almost like as a hobby? Right? It just feels that it's like a hobby for the regulator to look at fintech, and they're not really understanding what's happening. And I think that at the top, everyone will agree that they have to look at the topic. But what happens is that in everything, in middle management, they have a lot of day-to-day work they have to apply, and they have a lot of restrictions even in budget in terms of how they look at things. And the reality with innovation, and even for the fintech teams, is that they don't necessarily have the resources to really become a pillar within the regulators' bodies. And I think the reason we see almost this schizophrenic application of some regulations coming out that almost contradicts some of the intentions is because of that. It's because of this dichotomy of the top very much supporting innovation, but then in the trenches, a lot of the people that are within the regulatory bodies are still not really trained to understand fintech. And the only way, I think, for things to change is going to be, and this is something that I advocate a lot, is that the regulators themselves need to really be upskilled, and not as a hobby, but really as something that they entrench in the way they think of the industry, the way they think about the future of the industry. And that's what I think as a fintech sector, as a RegTech sector, we need to really be lobbying for, is basically regulators that understand enough about technology to make regulations that make sense for all of us. And they're aware of the problematic, definitely at the top. But from there to action, we might need a few more years, unfortunately.
Mhm.
But Diana, this is, and Izhar, 1 second before you jump in, because I know you definitely have a comment about this, but the regulators aren't really equipped so each one is focused on their own industry. It's very hard to go outside of this box and seeing, okay, on a granular level, let's see on a macro level, what will be the impact of what I'm doing, and I'm trying to make good, or I'm trying to do an impact for a specific avenue, but it contradicts other regulatory frameworks that are existing. So this is frustrating for customers.
It's frustrating. And I think the problem is, when I speak about this upskilling, it's not just an understanding of technology. It also means the way and the format in which they release regulation, right? So they need to be thinking about regulation more in terms of open source type projects. They need to be thinking about data standards that are technologically driven, not just legislatively driven. They need to be thinking about publishing regulation in a way that's machine readable. And that's what really upskilling means, right? Because for the industry, like these contradictions that you're talking about is because they're made by people, right? It's human beings that actually write legislation. But when you actually think about how to write these things in a way that's technologically driven, then that means that the contradictions will be far less, because when you think about data standards, when you think about those kind of things, they're a lot more black and white than subjective regulation. And that's the only way forward for global regulation, really.
I think it also has something to do with their framework and agenda. But Izhar, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I perfectly agree with Diana. I think that sometimes when you talk with the regulators or you see what they're doing, it's actually they're holding the rope from both sides. So on one side, they could create more and more, for example, financial licenses. So each and one of them would be a deposit-taking institution and PSPs and so on and so forth. And they will create this amazing thing that people would be able to take and use and create more financial services, which will be incredible, because like that we could, democratize or enable more and more people to join this financial era on one side. But on the other side, they're forgetting that these are small financial institutions, and they lack the understanding sometimes, but in most cases they lack the resources to actually stand in so much differentiation and so much laws and regulations that are frequently changing all the time and adding and more and more and more. And what we're seeing in a lot of cases is that it's very vague. So people can look at the same regulation and understand it very differently, and they will act very differently. A lot of the regulations are changing so frequently. And in that regard, I truly agree with Diana saying that they need to look on their, on the country or the region or on the different regulated bodies under them in a different way, in a way that they should be adding and not decreasing, and they should push them to succeed and not push them to succeed and then take a lot of different, so much effort from them. So I think that regulators should really try and look at this revolution in a different way in order to really push it forward and not push it and then take it back and push it and take it back, because it kills people.
Josh, I'm going to challenge you with what Izhar just said. Do you think that regulators should consider having different framework based on size of the bank or size of the financial institution because they have different resources? Do you think that okay, let's start with that, and then I'll get to the different requirements and jurisdictions. But let's start with that. Do you think that we need to make a differentiated regulatory framework, not only on financial institutions based on the subject that they are, but the size?
Well, that's a lot of things that I see on a global basis. It is based on size, and actually that's one of the problems. So you can have, like, let's say what we call a bulge bracket bank, right? So one of the global banks. I don't particularly like that expression, but like, in other words, one of the large global banks financially, and they are treated differently because they're too big to fail, and they're regulated at a different manner because if, let's say, and I don't want to mention any names, but let's say one of the big 10 banks of the world, everybody knows them. If one of them goes, the ripple effect to all the economies around the world is substantial. So they're treated differently and perhaps not fairly. But where I find the challenge with the regulatory agencies around the world on a global basis, because I work with a lot of different countries, and we have what I would consider very sharp pyramids. So at the top, you have very, very elite, forward-thinking, very smart, educated, quick-moving. And then what happens, human beings tend to throw money and people at problems versus technology. So as you go down the organization, you might have 10 brilliant people, and then all of a sudden you have 10,000 foot soldiers that don't have the right education. And, I used to be overly harsh when I was regulated myself in so many fields for about 20 years that you get harsh, and the regulators, oh, why are they doing this? Why are they doing that? But on the other side, I remember working in Saudi Arabia one time, and a 25-year-old regulator was getting in his car on the way home and actually going and stopping at physical locations and finding illicit activity. And I was like, why are you doing this? He has no gun. He has no law enforcement with him. He's by himself. So we have such good people in the field. They need the right tools. And I think one of the things that Diana said, like, the machine readable rules and regulations, smart contracts. So there's better ways to do this versus sending people to solve a technical problem. And that's what I think we're doing around the world. But, I'm not a defender or an advocate or either. I'm very neutral on, I try to be very neutral, but regulatory agents are enforcers. What we have to do is reach out, deal with elected officials that set policy, also deal with the regulatory, and then deal with law enforcement. So we all have to deal with those three areas. So when those three areas in any country are not in sync, you have problems and you stifle growth, and you actually stifle the economy. So if you have a good regulatory body, a good law enforcement body, and your elected officials are making good policy, your country can grow. And then you could reestablish yourself in the global community. And I think that's the way we need to be looking at the regulatory agents. Well, how does a country's regulatory body, law enforcement and policies fit into the global democracy?
Oh, sorry, I was on mute for some reason. Someone told me to put on mute.
I thought you were encouraging me to continue to speak, but
no. But John, I'm gonna take what you said, and you mentioned regulatory and framework and global, which I'm gonna take the global aspect of it and gonna ask all of you a very fundamental question. Okay, so the risk level and requirement not only change based on who is being regulated, but it's also what is the jurisdiction. So, and different one has completely different requests. So the completeness of data is changing. The privacy issues, the utilization of data, what can we do with it? So how can we really gap it's almost impossible. And you see companies, they have to select, okay, if we're going to work in Europe, which country or which market, which regulator will ease us or work with us the best in order to enter the market. And then if we need to go global, we need to get to new regulator. So how are we going to ease the process? So is there any way to do this on a connect everything? Like this is the requirement. You need to fit in here. And okay, this is global. Why is it so local jurisdiction wise? And Izhar, what do you think about that?
I think that what we're seeing right now is a big shift or move of the G7, G20, a lot of different initiatives in the UN. I hear a lot about different movements around that part that regulators are trying to align themselves. Yet, nevertheless, you're absolutely right, because, for example, the privacy issues you talked about are very different from different jurisdictions, and it's very hard to maintain so many different attitudes towards this. Nevertheless, again, in a lot of different places, they're trying to align that these days. So the CCPA is going to be a bit closer to GDPR, for example, or the Israeli regulation, privacy regulation is basically based on GDPR and so on and so forth. So we see that there is a movement towards trying consolidating, but I think that the most important thing is actually using technology. And as Diana said before, bringing from the regulator or taking from the regulator something that is more comprehensive for regulation, something that would actually work much more in a better way. So we're in a session talking about AI and about technology with regulation. And I think that this is where we can bridge these gaps. Nevertheless, we need two things from my end, or from what I think. First is that the regulators will look on what the others is doing and trying to make something that will adhere to their needs on one side, but on the other side will adhere to other regulators and other regulations. The second is that regulators will push for more technological aspects and give us the tools and the abilities to bring these and bridge these gaps between the different regulations that there are today in the world.
Okay, but okay, I won't mind you.
It's okay. It's okay.
No, you fast forward the discussion to AI. I don't know what to do now. But no, I'm kidding.
No.
But no, I'm joking. It's fine. But Diana, really, so do you think we can have this data standardization, which will have some sort of one source of truth? So companies, financial institutions will know this what I need to apply, and if I'm applying that, if I'm following these fundamental rules, I should be fine. Why can't we reach that?
I mean, the answer is obviously yes, right? We have been working on data standards since the beginning of our company, and it's a global data standard that's open source, so that's called FIRE, that we started with a grant from the European Commission. And what's interesting is that it basically complements a lot of these efforts that are happening by individual regulators. And so what we have found is that it's actually relatively straightforward to define data in a similar way, right? So there will be very particular data attributes per country. That's fair. But the vast majority of data attributes, across the world is going to be quite similar. Everyone has to define a maturity, everyone has to define a notional, all of that kind of stuff. And the divergence really comes from legislative type definitions, which can be quite subjective, as Izhar was mentioning, versus a schematic way of looking at data, which is how data is actually held in databases. And so our own experience is a testament that that's very, very much possible. What's difficult is really people, right? So you will find that the when you start making that jump from, okay, how do we define data from not just legislative but also something that's more schematic, people can be very uncomfortable in the regulatory body, right? So we have actually heard regulators say that they were not comfortable with looking at data in a schematic format because that's just not what they're used to. And it's really more about human beings, which in some ways, that's why this upskilling conversation is quite interesting, because it's almost the role of innovators to kind of take people with them, right? And that includes regulators. So the same way that we have to, as entrepreneurs, convince, clients and, take people with us in that innovation that we're doing as companies, there is a reality of actually walking hand in hand with the regulators and helping them as well to understand what's possible. So I think that the answer is totally yes. I think from a technology perspective, so many things have been answered in our industry already. Adoption is a different story, and that is a lot more like the limiting factor there has a lot more to do with human beings than actually the technology itself. And in some situations it's actually good, because it's good that we take our time to adopt certain things more broadly, like artificial intelligence. You want to make sure that it's done in a way that's correct for a stable financial industry and economy, right? But I think that in some instances, if that upskilling came at the same pace that innovation is happening, then we would be having very different conversations and a lot more productive conversations with the regulatory bodies as to what works and doesn't work. So it's, it's a really exciting journey, I think, that we will all be witnessing. The problem is more that the pace at which the technology is moving versus how quickly the regulators are moving is a bit disjointed, right? And you have already
it's always this competition between market versus regulator, but
correct.
I think right now a lot of people see regulators as there's a right path and the wrong path. And John, we actually talked about this for a while, and it relates to what Diana is saying. How are we moving? And we see some regulators doing some progress in that realm. So moving from a rule-based kind of right and wrong perspective that we have in mind when we think of a regulator, to a score-based decision making, not taking everything as an item. And on my point of view, is this is a good way to start leveling the field. But what do you think of that? And do you think this is tangible?
Well, I do, and also I like the expression that you just used, leveling the field. Earlier we were talking about big banks and smaller financial organizations size, right? But if you think about it, what's really, really important is the aspects of the technology, not necessarily the size of the organization anymore. And I think this is where, on a global basis, regulators need to adjust very quickly. Also, policymakers and law enforcement need to adjust very, very quickly. And why I say that is, if you go into different GNP and different countries, whoever makes really good technical decisions and whoever makes good regulatory decisions will attract the right business. And fintechs and our marketplace is very agile. It's not thinking in the old way. So if you take thinking from the 1970s and 80s, and even when I started trading in the mid 80s, we were when we were trading options, it changed the whole dynamics of futures. You were now looking at mathematical models that we thought were very advanced, and they were kind of basic. Now, if you look at what's out there, like, we haven't even fully adopted blockchain, right? So it's kind of like, so you could go in and have conversations about blockchains in different countries, and some people be like, what are you talking about? Then you go to another country and it's kind of like, oh yeah, we want smart contracts, we want legislation that is machine reading, and all of these sort of things. So I think the global community is not going to only flow by what's produced in their country anymore. It's going to be adjusted based on the technology that they embrace. El Salvador last week has said that Bitcoin is going to be a standard currency. So the next day we had a meeting at, should we open an office in El Salvador? I never said that in my life, but all of a sudden it was like, well, they've advanced something. It's going to be legal tender, and it's kind of like, well, maybe we could have an office in El Salvador. So, but whoever embraces technology can move and help their country in ways that was not possible years ago. So one of the things that if you look at some of the, and for a lack of a better word, some of the big, old, heavy type of companies could be replaced in a matter of weeks, technically speaking. So you might have somebody competing, Xerox was a big company, and then it disappeared in a very, very short period of time. But if you embrace technology and you look at, certain technologies and artificial intelligence or machine learning type things, that's one aspect. We're already talking about and debating how to implement quantum computing. So like when you take those things and you start merging them together, things are going to move at a rapid pace. This is the best time to be in the financial services, the best time to be alive, actually. If you think about the advancements in technology, if applied correctly, could all of a sudden take an underbanked nation and put them immediately into a mid type level with a GNP that grows at 12, 14, 15% annually versus 1 or 2 or negative. And just one other thing, yeah. I think it's important what was being discussed a little bit as far as the data side. In the global community, I actually had a job once, and it was a legal term. My title at the bank was data czar. And because you had to have one. So it's a crazy title, but the issue wasn't so much, I didn't know what does a data czar do? All day long, I spent not with consolidating and unifying data. It was like, who owns the information and who's responsible to adjust the information? So it's, we had all of these big data projects, multiple billion-dollar projects on a global basis. And that path went down, and then people were like, it wasn't successful. No, we started a whole new generation of thinking on how to manipulate and store data. So we went from data warehouses back only in the 1990s, early 2000, to a data lake. Now we have to be looking at data oceans, which are democratic and global. And that's where, without a data ocean, where it's standardization for some, but you could still keep your ideology of your nationality with a data lake. But you have to fit into a data ocean, which is owned by everybody, or standardized, not owned, but standardized by everybody, so everybody can participate. Rich nations, poor nations, developing nations. If they adapt to a data lake, you could do correspondent banking at a whole new level. So if you apply these things, data oceans, quantum or artificial intelligence, or quantum technologies, artificial intelligence, or machine learning, you could take a smaller country like Zimbabwe and all of a sudden make them an international player within a matter of 6 to 10 months.
I think the most recent example of how a regulator can make a huge difference is Lithuania. No one knew about this market at all. It had everybody went out of the country to find work in other places, and the regulator really made a shift into one of the highest volume of EMIs in the EU, and that's super impressive. And it's a matter of 4 years. And right now they're becoming this small market with a huge number of fintechs and very progressive, and a lot of multinationals. So regulator can make the shift, and I agree that size of countries is no matter an element as it was before. But what I want to touch and I want to follow from what you said, and I'm going to approach you, Izhar, because we're talking about leveling the field and how to make regulatory standards. So most of the financial institutions are operating in their own, let's say, regulatory sphere, depending on the market that they're operating. But once they're moving into corresponding banking, once they're moving into global transactions, then there's a new set, or not new, but additional sets of regulations that they need to apply. This is a whole different level of leveling the field. There's a huge latency in cross-border payments. and this is something that you deal on a day-to-day basis. And so I'd love to hear your input on what do you think will be the end of it, and what can we do about it?
Yeah, thank you for that. So I think that first, you're absolutely right. When we're moving between countries, things are getting very difficult or much more complicated, and you need to adhere to more and more and more regulations. And in most cases, you as a financial institution doesn't really know the future of the money that is going to where it's going to land. So in some cases, because of the length of these chains, you do not really understand that your money is going to, as an example, come from Israel to Turkey, but from Turkey to Mexico, and then US, and after that to the UK, and land in Spain. So you will never know what kind of different regulations you will need to answer through, the chain that the money is moving through. And another thing that we're seeing today that is creating a lot of problems is that most regulations or most information is based actually on declarations. So think about a company. How do I know who is the ultimate beneficiary owner if he didn't declare that? And therefore, this is very open to manipulations, and it's very difficult to actually gather information from another country that is basically should be one source of truth. But at the end, it's based on declarations, and at the end, it's very different from country to country how you can actually acquire this information. So going for a second for the UBO example, the ultimate beneficiaries, what we think and what we think that should happen in this world is that every piece of information that is required for global transactions, for wire transferring, or for actually cross-border business needs to be the same. So countries need to have a UBO registry, for example, like the UK or like other countries that did that, but it needs to be global accepted, and there are countries that should adhere to these regulations and not become safe havens for people that doesn't want to declare anything. So what I'm saying is very contradicting to what is the global shift right now, that everybody's talking about Bitcoin, and everybody doesn't want the regulators to go in and actually wants to hide their information and privacy and so on and so forth. But at the end, when the regulator needs to actually understand who is transferring the money and what is the cause for this, what is the source of funds, and so on and so forth, we have to, as you said, level up the quality of the information, but our ability as fintechs and as financial institutions, the ability to actually acquire this information and get it. And more than that, it should not come from private companies. It has to be public. It has to be something that everybody could get and reach for, because this is the new world that we're talking about, is democratizing these kind of solutions, democratizing these kind of information. And if we will not do that, the power will still be maintained by the same bodies, the same very, very big banks with the same data companies. And I have to say that a lot of them do not want to work with fintechs. A lot of them do not want to work with small financial institutions. They have the power to actually disable a lot of the business that is going around the world. And I will not say names, but there are a lot of data providers that are contacting us and saying, you're too small, or this is something that is not interesting for us. But on the other side, and sorry for being so Israeli, I don't need to ask you to give me this information. This information should be public, period. The ultimate beneficiary registry of, I don't know, Germany has to be public, and in Germany it is, but in other places as well. And there is no one company that can control that. And they maintain identities and privacy information, PII information about companies, about people, and they're selling that, which is okay if it's under the regulation on one side. On the other side, it's not okay if I cannot buy it. It's not okay if I cannot acquire it. And I have to say that it has to be free and accessible for everybody, because this is the only way that we will open up the world and actually give access to everyone for financial services and financial inclusion.
This is phenomenal. Having such a flow will be phenomenal. John, I see you agitating in your seat. Anything you want to challenge?
I try to keep things secret, but I can't. That just excited me because the reason is
really good at poker.
It creates a whole new world order. And I want to give a real life example. There was a big bank, a very large bank, a global bank, but it happened to be in the United States, and they were using a certain technology. And SightSpan, I was trying to get into them, but we're a small firm. So I bought the technology from the large firm, and I hired the people. I went back to the organization. They said, "Oh, no, we don't like that." And I was kind of like, wait a second. It was the same technology I bought it. It was the same that was at the larger firm. They said, no, it's no good. I actually went to the board, and this is a gigantic company. They didn't realize that I was working for the board also. And I said, you have corrupt people. You have corrupt thinking. Because the SightSpan is a small firm and that was a large firm, it was the same technology. It was the same people. Now, I took that and I went to a firm that had 100 people, maybe 150. It's going live next week. It's $3.3 billion. It's being listed next week. So there's thinkers and actors, and then there's old thinking. And the old thinking is simply, that's how quick it could go away.
Yeah,
we have to be embracing things at a different level. And whoever does, you could go from in a matter of 5 years, you could now go from a 150 person firm to a $5 billion firm. And we're seeing it all around us. We're seeing it. So, so in other words, this is not something that we're saying, and, Diana we're talking about things that are not 10, 15 years away. These are things that are in flight right now. And that's the cool thing about our industry.
Diana, let me before you, or maybe to connect your answer, I want you also to think on what will be the role of AI in the regulation, let's say the regulatory framework, and how will that help in making the shift towards a better, let's say, seamless path for regulation?
So, I think that AI, sometimes it's being taken as the answer to everything, right? And that's not the truth, And I think it's, before we get to that world, the conversation around standards, technological standards, open data, that kind of stuff, which, we've just been discussing, is really one, a low-hanging fruit because it's very doable. But then two is really what creates the way to level the playing field, right? So if you want AI to be a reality that's not managed by just very large tech companies, you need to have this data that is accessible, that we've been discussing. You need to have this reality of interoperable systems. And what's really interesting is, listening to my colleagues on the panel now, is that, the experience of any entrepreneur in enterprise software, not consumer businesses, right, but enterprise software, is very similar, right, where you basically are fundamentally really fighting against a very large machine that has been set up in a certain way for a long time, and it comes down to obviously a status quo that benefits larger companies, not necessarily the smaller ones. And so I think that obviously the companies that succeed, and all of us in the panel are probably succeeding. If not, we wouldn't be on the panel. You basically have to almost find a way to play the game to make it, right? And I think that that's something that I would advise to any entrepreneur that is in the enterprise piece and in B2B and financial services. You need to find your giant, right? You need to find a way to help you crack that beast, because it's difficult to do it alone. And so I think that the conversation around data being accessible and it being something that people can actually use, and something that innovators can use, is really essential. And that cannot happen without data standardization. It just cannot happen, right? Because even if, for example, sometimes the conversation goes around, oh, can we get dummy data to, train models and do that kind of stuff? That is just nonsense, because dummy data within one bank, within one system, is going to be completely different to another system. So it's completely redundant the way that some of these conversations go. From a technological perspective, the only way for Salvador, or even some countries to completely come out of poverty or to be seen as financially stable is if you can demonstrate that the way that they handle their internal data is actually okay for things like KYC and AML, etc. And that's why there is this amount of resistance, I think, around data standards that doesn't come from regulators, because I think they really get that that's important. But obviously, large tech companies are not necessarily going to be very supportive of that, because that fundamentally opens up a situation where their own data dictionaries and their own way of locking in clients becomes redundant. And so obviously, here we're all entrepreneurs that are trying to open up the data, because we really understand that the way that large tech companies, keep monopoly is by locking in clients through that data, right? So if you stop working with a large tech company and using their data dictionary, then you can't use their data dictionary anymore, right? If you work with a large tech company, it's very difficult to get out your data as a financial client, and that means that it just perpetuates this situation where you have this vendor lock-in, which has actually really come into the light of regulators in the last few years, where you have to demonstrate as a financial institution that part of your operational risk management is that you don't have vendor lock-in. And it all comes down to that very simple thing of data standards.
But this is the role of the regulator. This is why they're there. This is why we see sandbox of regulators all over the place, isn't it? Like to try and provide access for more data.
They can't, right? They can't, because they don't understand data themselves. I mean, this is the conversation we've had with regulators, where they really appreciate the problematic, but they don't understand how data is defined within a database. And this is why data standards that are open, and the whole conversation around open banking, interoperability, etc., is around that, is around basically, well, you want this data to be able to flow from one place to the other. You want it to be accessible and understandable for someone who's in a university trying to make a study. How is that going to happen if you don't have data standards? And data standards are only going to be driven, from people who understand schemas and development, basically technological development, working with people who understand legislation, and that's the regulators. So unfortunately, the regulators are only one part of the equation, and that's where there's a lot of friction, right? Because a lot of very large tech companies are not pro that, right? They don't want an approach that that will prevent them from locking in their customers by locking in their data.
That's where I just to add on to that, I think that's where what Izhar is doing is very important, in the sense where the regulator is good for their boundary and their self-interest. I mean, they get paid for by the citizens of their country. But if you look at, I kind of like what TenureX is doing, in the sense where they'll go into each country, naturalize and neutralize that data for that specific country, and then move it what I'm calling a data ocean, right? Because that's a global community. But someone would be able to go in, and I think it's the beginning, it's the first step. But I also don't think this is coming from the big gigantic firms. It's coming from the TenureX's and other firms like it, where you can put into a data lake and put in your requirements, and then say which countries fit into that. And that forces countries and it forces regulators and financial institutions and policymakers to be looking at that data, what I'm calling a data ocean. Because without the data ocean, everything that Diana says is I believe in, and it's absolutely true. But to me, the data ocean is the global community, and then the regulator has to protect the citizens of that country. But we have to have that balance. And I think from what I'm very interested in is cross-border and movement of money on a global basis, so that we're taking money. For lack of a better, I know it's socially correct, but I want to create more of a democracy, global democracy, where large rich countries are able to trade with poorer countries equally and equally as fast, so that we can have young entrepreneurs in Africa and women in India having access into the global banking community. And the only way to do that is with a data ocean, using these sort of tools that touch on AI. AI is not the answer to everything, but it'll get us to the next spot to create a democracy and fairness in the marketplace.
And just one thing, and we cannot see them as risk. We cannot continue in seeing these things as risky, because when someone in India, a woman in India, is opening a business and she wants to sell globally, this is not directly a risk. This is a person that wants to join the game, the financial game, and we cannot stop them because they're coming from India, because we do not know them, because they're I don't know, we never saw that business, because we cannot acquire more information about that. We cannot do that. And we as global population, I'll say, and we as entrepreneurs, and the Indian government in that regard needs to take this in consideration and start pushing the information, because we would enable them to do that. We feel that, or we believe that every transaction with a good cause needs to find a partner. And it doesn't matter if it's coming from Malta, India, or the US.
So that's very remarkable, and I hope to see this in the future. So we heard John concept for the future, and Izhar. We have like 10 seconds probably left. So
we never have enough time.
Diana, it's okay. Diana, just give me your input. When we'll be talking next year, or let's say in 3 years, what will we discuss? Like what will change?
So I'm hoping that we're going to take the pandemic as a big example of what's possible when people come together and decide to do something in one direction. And I think that's my hope. You know, we're coming out of this pandemic. We still have a few months, in front of us for sure. And I'm hoping the planning of the world that we're going into is of one where we've demonstrated how we can come together as a global community in making certain decisions. Let's use that reality that we've just experienced, where we've all suffered so much in so many different ways, to do something good, to make big decisions for the world, whether it's on the environmental front, on standards, on just leveling the playing field, which I think Izhar and John have been mentioning as well. I think a global community of people that are welcome to be the best they can be, really.
Wonderful. So thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Diana. Co-founder of Suade Lab. We had John from you played with
SightSpan.
for SightSpan, and we had Izhar, CEO from TenureX. This has been lovely, and I'm looking forward to do this next year and see what we evolved. Thank you very much, everyone, and Cohen,
back to me, right?
Take the stage back.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you all. It has been a great discussion, and I hope, John, you're not just going to run over to the gym and just stay around for a little bit, because I must admit that content around this or in this conference has been very high level, so very well done. And we're going to move on to another interesting industry insights, and that will be introduced by Mona. So I'm going to give the floor to Mona. Here we go.
Bye.
Goodbye.